12 years old, draped in silk, standing beneath marble ceilings that echo with wedding songs. Rome called it celebration. She felt it as a sentence. Tonight, the torches will burn bright on the Palatine Hill. Priests will bless the union. Senators will toast to alliance and bloodlines. But behind one locked door, a child will be expected to become a wife, not by choice, not by love, but by law. This is not legend, not myth, not exaggeration. This is the documented machinery of the Roman Empire, and the girls it quietly consumed. The age of consent was 12. Rome called it law. Nature called it danger. Before she became a wife, she was still a child. Picture the Palatine Hill at dusk, marble walls glowing gold in the dying light, torches flickering against polished stone, servants moving in rehearsed silence through corridors heavy with incense and expectation. Somewhere inside one of those villas stands a girl named Claudia, 12 years old, draped in a saffron veil that smells faintly of smoke and crushed flowers. By Roman standards, she is ready. By biological reality, she is not. Yet the law is clear. Under Roman civil code, a girl may marry at 12. No debate, no hesitation. Consent is irrelevant because authority belongs to the father. And in Rome, the father's power patria potestas as absolute. Claudia's marriage was decided 2 years earlier when she was 10. Her future negotiated across a polished table between her father, a senator, and a man old enough to remember wars she has only heard about in bedtime stories. The agreement was practical, strategic, profitable. Dowry counted in silver coins, political loyalty secured, alliances strengthened. In a civilization obsessed with legacy, daughters were currency. No one asked Claudia what she wanted. That question did not exist in the Roman vocabulary of power. Ancient writers did not hide this. Legal tablets recovered from Pompeii confirm the age. Letters preserved in desert sands reveal mothers instructing daughters to be obedient, silent, resilient. Medical texts from Soranus of Ephesus survive to this day, warning that pregnancy before 15 carried grave danger, tearing, hemorrhage, even death. Rome knew. The physicians wrote it plainly. But Rome calculated differently. Survival of bloodlines outweighed survival of girls. The preparation begins quietly. Claudia's mother teaches her how to run a household, how to command slaves without appearing cruel, how to lower her gaze during dinner gatherings, so men twice her age feel comfortable discussing statcraft above her bowed head. She is instructed how to endure discomfort without complaint, how to appear modest enough to satisfy tradition, and reluctant enough to prove innocence. Virginity is not personal. It is political insurance. The wedding ceremony itself is theatrical brilliance, sacrifices to Juno, sacred vows spoken beneath painted ceilings. Guests laugh, drink, whisper jokes heavy with implication. Claudia stands beside her groom and barely reaches his shoulder. When their hands are joined, it symbolizes transfer, not partnership. She passes from her father's dominion into her husband's legal control. Property follows her. Autonomy does not. As night approaches, the ritual procession escorts her to a new home she has never slept in before. She is lifted across the threshold, reenacting Rome's founding myth of abducted women taken to build a nation. The symbolism is deliberate. She must not enter willingly. Tradition demands she be carried, as if conquest itself were romantic. The door closes. The torches dim. Childhood ends without ceremony. This is not an isolated tragedy. Archaeological evidence from Roman cemeteries shows skeletal remains of girls whose bodies bear marks of repeated early pregnancies. Inscriptions praise them as devoted wives taken too soon. Too soon often meant before 25. The system did not malfunction. It operated precisely as designed. Rome called it virtue. History textbooks call it custom. But beneath the marble, beneath the poetry, beneath the glory of empire, the truth remains. The age of consent was 12, and the empire never apologized. And this was only the beginning. The ritual Rome never explained. The feast was loud. The city was watching. But the real ceremony began after the doors were locked. When the laughter faded and the final guests drifted into the Roman night, the villa fell into a silence that felt deliberate, almost ritualistic. The hymns had been sung, the wine consumed, the crude jokes shouted through marble corridors as tradition required. Publicly, everything had gone perfectly. Claudia had stood shy and obedient beneath her flame-colored veil, her small hands steady as they were placed into those of her husband. The vows had been spoken, the alliance secured. But Roman marriage was not considered complete until something else happened, something never described openly in official records, yet referenced everywhere in fragments, poetry, and law. Behind closed doors, the true validation of the union began. Roman writers were discreet, but not silent. The poet Catullus described brides as trembling, conquered like territories under Roman command. Ovid advised husbands that resistance was natural, that reluctance was part of the ritual dance between dominance and submission. These were not underground philosophies whispered in shadows. They were mainstream cultural assumptions, embedded in literature taught to elite boys. Now place those assumptions inside a bedroom, where a 12-year-old girl stands facing a man more than 4 decades older. The gap between law and humanity becomes impossible to ignore. Medical treatises from the era confirm what followed in countless households. Soranus of Ephesus wrote clinically about the physical risks faced by young brides: tearing, internal bleeding, infections that could spread rapidly without treatment. He recommended patience and restraint. His advice, however, was advisory, not enforceable. The law demanded consummation for a marriage to be legally binding. Without proof, suspicion could fall on the bride's purity. And proof in Rome meant blood. At dawn, tradition required inspection. Household slaves discreetly examined the linen for stains that confirmed virginity. It was not merely superstition. It was legal evidence. If blood appeared, the marriage was secure. If it did not, whispers could unravel alliances overnight. Imagine the psychological weight of that expectation. Pain was not simply endured. It was required. Trauma was transformed into validation. Claudia did not wake the next morning as a protected child bride celebrated for survival. She woke as verified property, her body having fulfilled its first civic obligation. The cruelty was structural, not exceptional. Rome framed the ritual as necessary for honor, lineage, stability. The empire depended on legitimate heirs, and legitimacy required spectacle. Every gesture reinforced hierarchy. The bride lifted across the threshold to symbolize capture. The obscene wedding songs normalizing what was to come. The silent inspection at dawn reducing intimacy to evidence. Nothing was accidental. It was choreography perfected over centuries. And yet Roman sources rarely describe the emotional aftermath. That silence is revealing. Letters survive discussing dowries, fertility, household management, but almost none describe how a girl felt the morning after. History recorded contracts and inheritances. It did not record fear. The absence itself is a statement. The ritual was so ordinary, it did not warrant commentary. That is what makes it haunting. By sunrise, Claudia's transformation was complete. Not from girl to woman, but from daughter to asset secured. Rome called it tradition. A tradition, repeated long enough, becomes invisible violence. And what happened that night was only the first test in a system that demanded far more than proof on linen. The bloodline machine. The wedding night was not the climax. It was the ignition. Rome did not marry girls for love. It married them for heirs. If the first night sealed the contract, the months that followed activated the machinery. Roman marriage was never a private arrangement between two people. It was a civic instrument engineered to manufacture legitimacy. Claudia's body, scarcely finished growing, now carried the unspoken expectation of immediate fertility. In elite Roman households, delay was suspicion. A wife who did not conceive quickly became the subject of quiet scrutiny. Fertility was proof of divine favor, of moral purity, of a properly ordered household. Infertility, by contrast, could threaten alliances and destabilize inheritance lines. And so the pressure began before Claudia had fully understood what marriage even meant. Within the first year, she was pregnant. She was 13. Archaeological studies of Roman-era skeletal remains reveal what polite literature avoided. Adolescent pelvises not yet fully developed, bone trauma associated with obstructed labor, evidence of repeated childbirth in bodies that never reached full maturity. Roman physicians recognized the danger. They described prolonged labor that lasted days, internal tearing, fevers that followed delivery. Yet the social calculation remained unchanged. Rome needed son citizens to govern, soldiers to defend borders, heirs to inherit estates. The empire's expansion depended on population growth, and population growth required early reproduction. Girls were not simply wives. They were demographic strategy. When Claudia's labor began, it lasted 3 days. There was no anesthetic beyond diluted wine, no surgical intervention for a living mother if the child became stuck. Caesarean procedures were performed only when the mother had already died or was beyond saving. Survival was often determined by luck and anatomy. When the child finally arrived a daughter, the relief in the household was measured, not ecstatic. A son would have strengthened the line. A daughter meant repetition of the same system in another generation. Recovery was brief, because recovery was a luxury Rome did not prioritize. Within weeks, Claudia resumed supervising servants, managing household accounts, appearing beside her husband at dinners where men discussed state affairs. Within months, she was pregnant again. There was no reliable contraception, no structured birth spacing. Sexual access within marriage was assumed. Roman law did not recognize marital refusal as meaningful. A wife's primary civic duty was reproduction. By the age of 20, Claudia had endured multiple pregnancies. Inscriptions carved into Roman tombstones across the empire echo the same pattern. Married at 11, mother of 3 by 16, praised for modesty and obedience, dead before 25. The epitaphs speak of virtue, but omit exhaustion. They honor fertility, but conceal physical collapse. Pelvic scarring visible in excavated remains confirms the toll. The empire celebrated the outcome while ignoring the cost. This was not cruelty hidden in shadows. It was efficiency embedded in culture. Rome engineered a system that maximized reproductive years by starting early, extracting the highest number of pregnancies before biology gave way. The language of honor masked the arithmetic of survival. Claudia was not unique. She was statistically typical, and the machine did not slow simply because she was tired or afraid or still learning what adulthood meant. It demanded continuity. The wedding night proved she was a wife. The pregnancies proved she was useful. And Rome was only getting started. The laws that rewarded childbirth Rome promised freedom to women who bore 3 children. But how many survived long enough to claim it? By the time Claudia turned 16, she had already endured more physical strain than most modern adults experience in a lifetime. Yet in the eyes of Roman law, she was progressing exactly as intended. In 09 AD, Emperor Augustus introduced the Lex Papia Papiae, legislation designed to increase birth rates among Roman citizens. On the surface, it appeared progressive. Women who bore 3 children were granted certain legal privileges, freedom from male guardianship, increased property rights, and social respect. It sounded like empowerment. But beneath the polished language of reform was a calculation as cold as marble. To gain freedom, a woman first had to survive repeated childbirth. The Roman state understood demographic decline as a political threat. Wars drained male populations. Disease reduced families overnight. The solution was not structural reform or medical advancement. It was acceleration, start marriages earlier, produce more children, incentivize fertility. Women's bodies became instruments of national stability. Claudia did not read the text of Augustus' law, but she lived inside its consequences. Every pregnancy moved her closer to theoretical autonomy, while simultaneously pushing her closer to physical collapse. By her fourth pregnancy, her body bore visible signs of depletion. Nutritional deficiencies were common even among elite households because repeated childbirth drained iron and calcium. Skeletal studies from Roman burial sites show bone density loss in young mothers, vertebral compression from strain, and pelvic distortion caused by obstructed labor. Ancient doctors recognized the risks, but had limited tools. They could recommend rest. They could not enforce it. Cultural expectation outweighed medical caution. The irony is brutal. Roman inscriptions praised women who died in childbirth as paragons of virtue. She fulfilled her duty. The stones often read, duty meant endurance. Endurance meant silence. Claudia's household would have admired her resilience, not questioned the structure demanding it. And if she reached the threshold of 3 surviving children, society would label her fortunate, even powerful. Yet that empowerment existed only because the state first extracted everything it required from her body. Divorce laws further tightened the system. Although Roman men could dismiss wives relatively easily, a woman's ability to leave was constrained by economic dependence and social stigma. If Claudia failed to produce heirs, her position became precarious. If she produced them but resisted expectation, she risked isolation. Autonomy was conditional, never inherent. The law rewarded fertility, not individuality. And so the cycle continued. Pregnancy, recovery, pregnancy again. A household ledger recorded births like assets. Each surviving child increased political security and inheritance stability. Each labor reduced Claudia's reserves. Rome celebrated motherhood publicly, while normalizing maternal mortality privately. Girls married at 12 could be dead by 23 and still be described as having lived honorably. The brilliance of the system lay in its appearance of virtue. Laws framed childbirth as civic contribution. Religious rituals sanctified it. Poetry romanticized it. But beneath ceremony and statute was arithmetic. Maximize reproductive years, accept losses, sustain the empire. Claudia did not see herself as a statistic. She saw herself as a wife trying to survive. Yet history shows the design clearly. Rome promised freedom after 3 children. It rarely promised survival. And the deeper Claudia moved into this legal web, the harder escape became.
The silence in the inscriptions, their tombstones praise devotion. But stone can flatter, and still conceal the truth. Walk through any Roman necropolis today, from the Appian Way to the outskirts of ancient colonies, and you will find rows of carved marble faces staring back across 2,000 years. The inscriptions are tender, almost poetic. Beloved wife, modest and faithful, mother of 3. Taken too soon, they read like tributes to virtue, frozen in stone. But what they rarely mention is age at marriage, number of pregnancies before 20, or the physical cost of fulfilling those praised duties. Claudia's epitaph would have followed the same formula: dignified, restrained, respectful. It would not have recorded that she entered marriage at 12, or that she spent nearly every year of her adolescence either pregnant or recovering from childbirth. Stone preserves honor, it edits suffering. Roman society was meticulous in documentation. Legal contracts, dowry records, census rolls, military service logs all survive in fragments. Yet when it comes to the private interior lives of young brides, the record thins into silence. That silence is not accidental. Cultural systems often preserve what reinforces stability and omit what threatens it. If Rome's greatness relied on orderly households and legitimate heirs, then the narratives surrounding marriage had to appear orderly as well. Trauma does not fit neatly into imperial propaganda. Literary sources offer hints when read carefully. The poet Sulpicia, one of the few Roman women whose verses survive, wrote about love as something constrained by expectation. Her tone is personal, almost rebellious, revealing emotional tension that official inscriptions ignore. Later compilers nearly excluded her work from canonical collections, perhaps because it complicated Rome's polished image of marital harmony. When women's voices slipped through the cracks of preservation, they hinted at cages built from custom rather than iron. Archaeology, too, tells a story beyond marble praise. Skeletal remains of women buried in their late teens and early 20s frequently show evidence of multiple pregnancies. Pelvic trauma, spinal strain, and signs of chronic malnutrition contradict the serene adjectives carved above them. These were not isolated tragedies, but statistical patterns. High maternal mortality rates were an accepted risk in a society prioritizing lineage continuity. The empire expanded its borders while its daughters quietly disappeared into graves marked dutiful. The most unsettling aspect is not individual cruelty, but collective normalization. Marcus Aurelius Cotter, Claudia's husband, would not have considered himself monstrous. He followed custom. He obeyed law. He secured alliances. That is precisely what makes the system chilling. When suffering becomes tradition, it loses its scandal and gains legitimacy. Rome celebrated endurance as virtue and framed early death as noble sacrifice. Modern readers often romanticize antiquity togas, marble forums, grand rhetoric about republic and empire. Yet beneath that grandeur lay domestic arrangements engineered for demographic survival. The inscriptions remain because stone survives weather and war. What they omit survives only in fragments, medical texts, and the quiet testimony of bones. Claudia's grave would have been admired for centuries as an example of Roman womanhood, devoted, loyal, obedient. But if we read between the chiseled lines, another narrative emerges, one not of glory, but of extraction. And the final chapter of that extraction was already approaching.
The civilization that called it normal. This was not scandal in Rome. It was structure. When suffering becomes tradition, it stops looking like cruelty. Claudia did not die dramatically beneath collapsing marble or in the chaos of war. She died the way many Roman wives did, quietly. After years of pregnancies, her body was never meant to endure so early. She was 23. By Roman standards, she had succeeded. She married advantageously. She produced children. She preserved alliances. Her grave inscription would likely have praised her modesty and devotion, presenting her short life as honorable completion rather than gradual depletion. The machine had done its work efficiently. The most disturbing truth is not the age difference, nor the wedding night, nor even the childbirth statistics. It is that none of it was hidden. Roman law stated plainly that girls could marry at 12. Medical writers openly acknowledged the risks of early pregnancy. Poets described frightened brides in language of conquest and victory. Emperors passed laws rewarding fertility. Nothing was secret. Nothing was underground. It was public policy woven into religion, literature, and family expectation. That transparency makes it more unsettling. Rome did not need to disguise exploitation. It baptized it as virtue. For modern audiences in the UK or USA, the instinct is to search for villains, an especially cruel husband, a barbaric custom confined to one era. But history rarely conforms to that comfort. Marcus was not uniquely monstrous. He was ordinary. Claudia's father was not a villain in Roman eyes. He was responsible, strategic, ensuring political stability. The priests who blessed the marriage believed they were protecting sacred order. When everyone participates, blame dissolves into culture itself. Recent archaeological reassessments have sharpened this understanding. Demographic modeling of Roman cemeteries reveals patterns of maternal mortality concentrated in the teenage years. Comparative skeletal analysis confirms the strain of repeated childbirth in adolescence. Scholars have begun questioning long-held romantic portrayals of Roman domestic life, examining marriage not as sentimental union, but as institutional mechanism. The fragments of letters and inscriptions, when assembled, form a pattern too consistent to ignore. Claudia's story was not exceptional. It was statistically predictable. Rome prided itself on discipline, order, and continuity. Those values built roads, aqueducts, and armies that reshaped the world. They also built domestic systems that prioritized lineage over girlhood. The empire lasted centuries because it engineered stability relentlessly. But stability came at a cost rarely acknowledged in triumphal arches or Senate speeches. It came at the cost of children whose lives were shortened in service of demographic necessity. Here is the final shock. Rome believed it was civilized. It contrasted itself against barbarian tribes, boasting of law and structure. Yet within its marble villas, 12-year-olds crossed thresholds into obligations they could not comprehend. Civilization is not immunity from harm. It is often the refinement of harm into policy. That is the uncomfortable reflection Claudia leaves us with. Her inscription might have ended with the phrase, "She lived well." By Roman standards, she did. But history, when stripped of ornament, forces a harder question. How many systems, ancient or modern, operate efficiently, while quietly consuming those with the least power? Rome called it normal. Rome called it honor. And for Claudia, normal was fatal.